If I had known that one joke would change the way everyone saw me, including the way I saw myself, I would have kept my mouth shut. But in that moment, standing on stage with a microphone in my hand, basking in the laughter of hundreds of people, I thought I was invincible. The company's annual gala was a big deal, an extravagant event held in one of the most expensive hotels in the city. It was meant to be a celebration of the company's success, a night where executives, employees, and even some of our biggest clients gathered to drink expensive champagne, show off their designer outfits, and pretend we were all one big happy corporate family. This year was even bigger than usual, with a grand ballroom filled with executives from multiple industries, all networking and forming partnerships that could change the future of business. And there I was, at the center of it all, cracking jokes in front of a packed crowd. The event had started with the usual speeches, long-winded, overly rehearsed, and filled with corporate buzzwords about synergy, innovation, and market expansion. As the night progressed, the alcohol flowed freely, and the atmosphere became more relaxed. That was when I saw my sister sitting near the back of the room, awkwardly adjusting the sleeves of her modest dress, looking completely out of place among the polished socialites and power players. Her name was Emma, and she had spent her entire life in the world of numbers. While I built my career in sales, where charisma, connections, and confidence were everything, she had taken a quieter path, working as an accountant. She was brilliant with financials, but had no interest in flashy galas, high-stakes negotiations, or power moves. She was the kind of person who read tax codes for fun, the type who got genuinely excited about spreadsheets and balance sheets. For as long as I could remember, I had always been the one who took center stage, while she was the one sitting in the audience, unnoticed and unremarkable. And in that moment, with the crowd hanging on to my every word, I saw an opportunity one couldn't resist. With a smirk, I raised the microphone to my lips and gestured toward my sister. "You know, I have to give my sister credit for coming tonight," I said, my voice carrying across the room with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years commanding attention. "She's an accountant, which means this is probably the most exciting thing she's done all year." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Encouraged, I continued. "Honestly, I don't even know how she has fun in her spare time. Maybe she sits at home organizing receipts or calculating depreciation on her furniture for fun." More laughter. Even louder this time. I could see people turning to glance at her, nudging their colleagues, smirking. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face expressionless, though I thought I saw the faintest tightening of her jaw. But I wasn't done. "We should all take a moment to appreciate the real heroes of the corporate world," I said, grinning. "Because while the rest of us are out here closing deals and building companies, accountants like my sister are making sure the decimal points are in the right place." The laughter turned into full-blown applause. I felt a rush of satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing I had completely won over the room. Emma, however, just sat there, unmoving, her expression unreadable. I expected her to blush, to laugh along awkwardly, or maybe even roll her eyes and shake her head like she always did when I teased her. But she did none of those things. Instead, she calmly stood up, smoothing out the fabric of her dress, and walked toward the front of the room. That was when I started to feel the first flicker of unease. She wasn't the type to seek attention. She wasn't the type to challenge me, especially not in a public setting. But as she stepped onto the stage beside me, taking the microphone from my hand without a word, I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Confidence. "Thank you for the kind words, brother," she said, her voice steady, even. "And thank you to everyone for the laughter. It's always nice to know that accountants are appreciated." A few people chuckled, though the mood in the room had shifted slightly. "But since I have the microphone now, I might as well share some news," she continued, scanning the room. "Some of you may not know this, but I'm not just any accountant. In fact, as of this afternoon, I am the new Chief Financial Officer of a company that many of you in this room are very familiar with." Murmurs spread through the crowd, heads turning toward each other in hushed conversation. I felt my stomach drop. I spent the last few months leading the financial restructuring of my company, a process that saved millions and positioned us for a merger that is going to change the industry, she said, her voice unwavering. And, funnily enough, just before I came to this gala, I received the finalized reports from our CEO. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel the shift in energy, the way the laughter had evaporated and been replaced by something entirely different. Emma reached into her bag, pulling out a sleek folder, and held it up. In this folder are the financials for the company that just acquired one of the most profitable firms in the sector, she said, her gaze sweeping over the audience. Some of you in this room have been negotiating with us for months, and I'd like to personally thank you for your patience. A stunned silence. Then, without warning, the crowd erupted into applause. Loud, enthusiastic, genuine. And in that moment, as I stood there frozen, watching my sister receive the kind of admiration and respect I had always craved, I realized something horrifying. The people who had been laughing at her a few minutes ago were now clapping for her. And then they turned to me. The applause thundered through the ballroom, an unexpected, deafening wave of admiration that seemed to swallow me whole. Just minutes ago, I had been the center of attention, basking in the laughter and appreciation of the crowd, but now, standing next to my sister, I felt as though the entire room had shifted on its axis. Emma stood tall, poised, exuding a quiet confidence I had never associated with her before. She had always been the reserved one, the quiet, logical thinker, the person who stayed in the background while I commanded the stage. But in that moment, with all eyes on her, I realized just how much I had underestimated her. The CEO of her company, a man I recognized immediately from financial magazines and industry conferences, stepped forward from the crowd, his expression one of genuine pride. "Emma, congratulations again," he said, shaking her hand firmly before turning to the audience. "It's about time everyone in this room knows exactly who she is." I've worked with a lot of financial executives over the years, but very few have the kind of precision, foresight, and strategic intelligence that Emma has demonstrated in the past year. His words landed like a punch to my gut. I had spent years crafting my reputation as a rising star in the corporate world, building relationships, perfecting my pitch, and mastering the art of persuasion. I had prided myself on my ability to read a room, to win people over with charm and confidence. But now, as I stood there, watching Emma receive the kind of recognition I had always chased, I realized something unsettling. Respect wasn't something you could demand with words alone. It had to be earned. Emma had earned it. The CEO gestured to the folder in her hand. "She didn't just balance the books," he continued. "She restructured the entire financial framework of our company, securing a deal that will change the landscape of our industry for years to come. Some of you in this room have been in negotiations with us, and if you were wondering who was making the tough calls behind the scenes, now you know." A murmur spread through the crowd, heads nodding in recognition, eyes darting between Emma and their own colleagues. A few executives whispered among themselves, likely realizing that the deals they had been working on had been influenced not by the figureheads they had assumed were in control, but by my boring accountant sister. I felt a tightening in my chest as I replayed my own words from earlier in the evening. She's just an accountant. She probably organizes receipts for fun. She makes sure decimal points are in the right place. What had been a harmless joke a few minutes ago now felt like the most embarrassing mistake of my career. Emma turned toward me, her expression unreadable, but I could see something in her eyes, something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite amusement, but a subtle mixture of both. She had spent years being underestimated, being brushed aside, being treated as someone who belonged in the background. But tonight, in front of a room full of the most powerful people in our industry, she had claimed her place in the spotlight. The applause finally died down, replaced by an expectant silence. People were looking at me now, but the energy had completely changed. Before, when I had been the one holding the microphone, the room had been on my side, laughing with me, enjoying the entertainment I provided. But now, their expressions were different. Some were curious, some were mildly amused, and some looked downright uncomfortable, as if they had just realized they had participated in something that had aged poorly in a matter of minutes. Emma still had the microphone, and instead of handing it back to me, she kept it. She took a step closer, lowering her voice slightly, so that only those standing closest to us could hear. "You've always been great at working a crowd," she said, tilting her head slightly. "And I have to admit, your jokes were pretty funny." A few people chuckled, though the laughter was cautious now, as if they weren't quite sure whether they were still allowed to enjoy the moment. "But here's the thing," she continued, glancing at the CO, then back at me. "While you were making fun of me for being an accountant, I was busy making financial decisions that affect some of the biggest companies in this room. And while you were telling the crowd that I spend my time organizing receipts, I was actually finalizing one of the most significant financial restructurings our industry has seen in the past decade." I swallowed hard. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't showing anger. She wasn't embarrassing me in return. She was simply stating facts. And somehow, that was worse. I had spent my entire life believing that power came from presence, from charisma, from the ability to command attention and direct the narrative. But Emma had just demonstrated something I had never fully understood before. True power didn't need to be announced. It spoke for itself. A slow clap started from somewhere in the crowd. A few people joined in. Then more. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding again, not because someone had told a joke, not because someone had delivered a well-rehearsed speech, but because Emma had done something far more difficult. She had proven herself. I shifted uncomfortably, the heat rising to my face, the weight of my earlier words pressing down on me like an unbearable weight. For the first time in my life, I was at a loss for words. Emma finally handed the microphone back to me, but the moment had already passed. The crowd had moved on, turning toward each other, eager to discuss the new financial power player in the room. A few executives approached Emma, shaking her hand, exchanging business cards, asking about potential future deals. The same people who had laughed at her earlier were now leaning in, desperate to be on her radar. And I was still standing there, microphone in hand, completely forgotten. For years, I had believed that I was the star, the one who could outshine anyone in the room. But tonight, for the first time, I wasn't even in the spotlight. I was just part of the background. The weight of the microphone felt heavier than it had before, as if it carried the full force of my humiliation in its grip. Only moments ago, I had been at the center of attention, reveling in the laughter of the crowd, feeding off their amusement, and playing the role I had always excelled at, the charming, confident, effortlessly charismatic speaker. But now, standing in the very same spot, I felt as though I had been stripped of something essential, something I had taken for granted my entire life. Emma had stolen the room without even trying. No, stolen wasn't the right word. She hadn't taken anything. She had simply stepped forward and revealed the truth, something so undeniable that the crowd had turned away from me without a second thought. The shift had been immediate, as swift as a tide rolling back into the ocean, leaving me standing alone on the shore, watching helplessly as all the attention, all the admiration, and all the respect followed her instead. I looked down at the microphone in my hand, aware of the deafening silence that had settled in my corner of the ballroom. People had moved on, their backs turned as they gravitated toward my sister, their laughter replaced by quiet murmurs of admiration, their body language shifting from amusement to curiosity. A few executives leaned in as she spoke, nodding in agreement, eager to hear her thoughts on financial strategy, eager to make connections that, moments ago, they hadn't even realized were worth making. I had always believed that I was the one with influence. But now, as I watched my sister command the room without a single ounce of effort, I realized just how wrong I had been. I forced a smile, willing myself to move, to do something, anything, that would salvage what remained of my dignity. I turned toward the bar, hoping that a drink might help me regain my composure, but as I moved, I caught the eyes of a few people still lingering near the stage. Their expressions weren't hostile, but they weren't exactly friendly either. There was something else there, something that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. Pity. Not one of them had forgotten the way I had mocked Emma only minutes ago. I reached the bar and set the microphone down, no longer wanting to hold it, no longer wanting any reminder of how quickly my confidence had unraveled. The bartender, a sharp-eyed man in a crisp black vest, glanced at me with a knowing expression, as if he had seen moments like this unfold 1,000 times before. "Whiskey neat," I said, my voice more subdued than I had intended. He nodded, poured the drink with practiced ease, and slid the glass across the polished surface. I took it gratefully, wrapping my fingers around the cool glass, staring down at the amber liquid as if it held the answers to all my problems. I had been so sure of myself, so certain that I understood how the world worked, that I understood people, that I knew exactly how to control a room. But tonight had shattered that illusion, forcing me to confront something I had never wanted to admit. Emma had never needed my approval. She had never needed my validation. She had never needed my jokes, my condescension, or my opinions on how she should present herself to the world. I had spent years believing I was the successful sibling, the one who had figured things out, the one who had taken the right path. But as I stood there, watching Emma shake hands with industry leaders, watching them hang onto her words, watching them treat her with the kind of respect I had always craved, I realized the truth. She had built something real. She had worked in silence, never demanding recognition, never seeking the spotlight, never trying to prove herself to anyone but herself. And now, in a single evening, she had done what I had spent my entire career trying to accomplish. She had earned respect. Not through charm, not through jokes, not through networking, but through action. I took a slow sip of my drink, feeling the warmth of the whiskey spread through my chest, grounding me in a way that nothing else could. I needed to get out of my own head, to clear my mind, to find a way to process everything that had just happened. But as I turned to leave, a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. "You okay?" I turned to find Emma standing beside me, her expression calm, unreadable. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't rubbing it in. She wasn't standing there with the triumphant smirk I probably would have worn if the roles had been reversed. She was just looking at me, waiting for an answer. I swallowed hard, resisting the urge to deflect, to make a joke, to fall back on the easy charm that had always been my shield. But I knew, in this moment, that she would see right through it. So I exhaled slowly, set my glass down, and met her gaze. "I didn't see that coming," I admitted, my voice quiet but sincere. Emma arched an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering across her face. "Did you ever stop to think that maybe you never really looked?" I had no response to that because she was right. I had never looked. Not really. I had spent so much time assuming I had her figured out, so much time believing that my way of seeing the world was the only way that mattered, that I had never truly considered that she might be doing something just as important, maybe even more important, than what I did. Emma sighed, reaching for her own drink, something lighter than mine, something with a lemon wedge balanced delicately on the rim. She took a sip, then set it down, watching me carefully. "You know," she said after a moment, her tone thoughtful. "I don't mind that you make jokes about me. I never have." I frowned, confused. "Then why?" She held up a hand, cutting me off gently. "It wasn't the jokes," she said. "It was the fact that you never saw me as anything more than a joke." My chest tightened at the quiet truth in her words. I opened my mouth to say something, to explain, to apologize, but she shook her head, giving me a small, knowing smile. "It's okay," she said. "I think tonight was the first time you actually saw me." And with that, she picked up her drink and walked away, leaving me standing at the bar, staring after her, realizing for the first time just how much I had misunderstood the person I had called my sister all my life. The sound of ice clinking against glass filled the silence between us as Emma turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing at the bar, feeling an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability creeping in. I had always believed I understood people, what motivated them, what made them tick, what drove them toward success. My entire career had been built on that belief, on my ability to navigate conversations with ease, to read the room, to win over clients and executives with effortless charm. But tonight, for the first time in my life, I realized that I had never truly understood my own sister. She hadn't just proven me wrong. She had forced me to confront something I had never considered before, that my perception of her had never been based on reality, but rather on the version of her I had created in my mind. I had always seen Emma as the quiet, predictable one, the responsible sibling who followed the rules while I pushed the boundaries. She was the one who double-checked the numbers, made sure the bills were paid on time, and stayed out of the spotlight while I took center stage. But standing here now, watching her seamlessly integrate into conversations with some of the most influential people in the industry, I realized how narrow that view had been. She wasn't just my sister. She was a force to be reckoned with. The realization settled uncomfortably in my chest as I picked up my drink again, taking another slow sip, my mind still reeling from the shift in dynamics. A few colleagues approached, their expressions carefully neutral, their small talk polite but distant, as if they weren't quite sure how to interact with me after what had just unfolded. I could feel the weight of their unspoken thoughts, the subtle judgment behind their words, the lingering amusement in their eyes. No one had forgotten the way I had mocked Emma on stage, and no one had missed the way she had turned the entire evening around with nothing but quiet confidence and undeniable competence. I had always prided myself on being the kind of person who could talk my way out of anything, who could smooth over any awkward moment with a well-timed joke or a clever remark. But as I stood there, watching Emma from across the room, I knew instinctively that there was nothing I could say that would undo what had already been done. I had underestimated her. And now, for the first time, I was the one who had to sit with the consequences of my own arrogance. I turned back toward the bartender, signaling for another drink, but before he could pour it, a voice interrupted me. "You don't need another one of those," a familiar voice said, and I turned to see my colleague, David, leaning against the bar beside me, his expression somewhere between amused and thoughtful. David had been with the company longer than I had, a seasoned executive who had seen his fair share of career missteps and corporate politics. He wasn't the type to sugarcoat things, and I knew without asking that he had been watching everything unfold tonight with great interest. I let out a dry chuckle, shaking my head. Didn't expect to get a lecture on my drinking habits tonight, but go ahead, I know you're dying to say something. David smirked, lifting his own glass before speaking. Not here to lecture, but I have to admit, that was one hell of a spectacle back there. You walked right into that one, didn't you? I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. Yeah, I did, I admitted, feeling the weight of my own misjudgment pressing down on me. I thought I was being funny, thought I was in control of the moment. Turns out I was the only one in the room who didn't realize I was setting myself up for disaster. David chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink before setting it down on the bar. That's the thing about people like your sister, he said. They don't need to announce their success. They just do the work, and when the moment comes, they let the results speak for themselves. I glanced across the room at Emma, watching as she spoke with a group of executives who were clearly captivated by whatever she was saying. The same people who had laughed at her earlier were now nodding in agreement, listening intently, eager to be part of whatever she was building. David followed my gaze, then turned back to me. You spent all these years thinking you were the one leading the way, he said. But the truth is, your sister never needed your validation. She's been playing her own game this entire time, you just never noticed. I exhaled slowly, setting my glass down, suddenly uninterested in finishing my drink. You know what the worst part is? I said, my voice quieter now. I wasn't just underestimating her. I was completely blind to everything she had been building right in front of me. I thought I knew her, thought I had her figured out, but tonight made me realize I never really looked. David nodded, his expression thoughtful. Well, he said, pushing off the bar, sounds like it's time you started. He gave me a small pat on the shoulder before walking away, leaving me standing there alone with my thoughts. For a long moment, I stayed where I was, letting everything sink in, the weight of my own ignorance, the sudden shift in how I saw my sister, the realization that for all my years of thinking I was the one who had everything figured out, I had been missing something far more important. Respect wasn't just about being the loudest person in the room. It wasn't about cracking the best jokes or commanding attention with effortless charm. It was about substance. And tonight, Emma had proven that in a way I never could have predicted. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and made a decision. It was time to stop assuming I had all the answers. It was time to actually listen. And more than anything, it was time to finally see my sister for who she truly was, not just some boring accountant, but someone who had built something real, something valuable, something I had been too arrogant to recognize. I stepped away from the bar, weaving through the crowd, making my way toward where Emma stood. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say yet, but for the first time in my life, I knew I was ready to listen. Walking across the ballroom toward my sister felt like the longest journey I had ever taken, even though it was only a matter of a few dozen steps. I had spent my entire life moving through crowds with ease, confident in my ability to steer conversations, to charm my way into the good graces of the right people, to ensure that I always left an impression. But tonight, for the first time, I wasn't walking toward someone to make myself heard. I was walking toward someone to listen. Emma was in the middle of a conversation when I reached her, speaking to a small group of executives who, judging by their expressions, were fully engaged in whatever she was saying. She hadn't noticed me yet, so I took a brief moment to observe, to take in the way she carried herself, the way she commanded attention not through flashy gestures or exaggerated confidence, but through something much rarer, knowledge, competence, and quiet authority. I had never realized how much power there was in simply knowing your worth and letting your work speak for itself. After a few moments, Emma caught sight of me out of the corner of her eye. Her gaze flicked over to me, registering my presence, but she didn't react right away. Instead, she calmly finished what she was saying, answering a final question from one of the executives before offering him a firm handshake. When she finally turned to me, there was no hostility in her expression, no lingering resentment, no need to rub anything in. She simply lifted an eyebrow, waiting for me to say something, as if she already knew this conversation had been a long time coming. I took a breath, gathering my thoughts. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice quieter than usual, stripped of the bravado I so often relied on. Emma studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Sure," she said simply. "Let's step outside." She led the way, weaving effortlessly through the crowd, not hesitating, not looking back to check if I was following. She knew I would. We stepped onto the terrace, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the warmth and energy inside. The city skyline stretched out before us, lights twinkling against the dark sky, a breathtaking view that I barely noticed because all of my focus was on the woman standing next to me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Emma leaned against the railing, arms crossed loosely over her chest, waiting. She wasn't going to make this easy for me, and honestly, she shouldn't. I had been blind to her accomplishments for years, had dismissed her work as dull, had assumed that because she didn't crave attention the way I did, she must not be doing anything of real significance. And tonight, in front of a room full of people, I had been forced to confront just how wrong I had been. "I owe you an apology," I said finally, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "Not just for tonight, but for all the times I made you feel like what you did wasn't important." Emma didn't react right away. She simply tilted her head slightly, considering my words before responding. "You didn't just make me feel like it wasn't important," she said evenly. "You made sure everyone else felt the same way too." I exhaled slowly, nodding. She was right. "Yeah," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck, feeling the weight of my own arrogance settle in my chest. "I guess I did." Another beat of silence passed between us before she spoke again. "You know, I never cared about being in the spotlight," she said, her voice calm, not accusing, just factual. "I never needed to be the loudest person in the room or have people hanging on to my every word. But that doesn't mean I wanted to be dismissed. That doesn't mean I wanted my own brother to turn me into a joke in front of hundreds of people. The directness of her words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I had spent so much time believing that Emma was content being overlooked, that she didn't care about recognition or validation. But the truth was, she had never needed my validation. She had just wanted to be seen for who she really was, instead of through the narrow lens I had forced upon her for years. I looked down, exhaling sharply before meeting her gaze again. I was an idiot, I admitted, my voice laced with regret. I thought I had you all figured out, but I never really took the time to see what you were actually doing. I thought being good with people meant knowing how to talk, but you showed me tonight that sometimes it means knowing how to listen. Emma watched me carefully, and I could tell she was weighing my words, trying to determine whether I truly meant them or whether this was just another attempt to smooth things over. After a moment, she sighed, shaking her head with a small, almost amused smile. "You always were good with words," she said, a hint of warmth in her voice. "But for once, I think you actually mean them." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I do," I said sincerely. "I know I can't undo years of being a condescending ass overnight, but I want to do better. I want to actually know you, Emma. Not just the version of you I've always assumed was real." She studied me for another moment before finally nodding. "All right," she said, the corners of her lips twitching slightly. "I guess it's about time you caught up." I let out a small laugh, relief washing over me, though I knew this wasn't something that could be fixed with just one conversation. It was going to take time, effort, and a real commitment to change. But for the first time in my life, I was ready. As we stood there on the terrace, looking out over the city, I felt something shift between us, not a complete resolution, not an instant fix, but something real. Something that could grow into the kind of respect and understanding that had been missing between us for far too long. I had always thought my greatest strength was my ability to talk. But tonight, I had learned that my real challenge, my real opportunity, was learning how to listen. The city stretched out before us, glittering in the night, a sprawling landscape of movement and ambition. I had always loved views like this, the kind that made you feel like you were on top of the world, that everything below you was within your reach if you just played your cards right. But tonight, for the first time, I wasn't thinking about power or success or the next big opportunity. I was thinking about my sister, about all the years I had spent assuming I understood her, about all the ways I had failed to actually see her. Emma stood beside me, her posture relaxed, but her expression still guarded, as if she wasn't quite sure what to do with this new version of me, the one who wasn't cracking jokes at her expense, the one who wasn't trying to control the narrative, the one who had finally stopped talking long enough to actually listen. For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but it wasn't quite an easy one either. It was the kind of silence that came when two people were recalibrating, when years of assumptions and misunderstandings were being dismantled piece by piece, leaving behind something fragile but real. I turned slightly to face her, exhaling slowly. "I meant what I said earlier," I said, keeping my voice steady, making sure she knew this wasn't just another performance. "I don't want this to be some grand gesture that fades away by next week. I want to actually do better. I want to understand who you are, not just as my sister, but as the person you've worked so damn hard to become." Emma studied me, her eyes searching my face for any sign of insincerity. "I'll admit," she said finally, her voice measured, "I wasn't sure what to expect when you walked over here. I thought maybe you'd try to spin this whole thing, make yourself the victim, turn it into just another funny story to tell later. But you're actually trying, and I respect that." I let out a small breath, nodding. "I don't blame you for expecting the worst," I said, leaning against the railing. "I've spent years treating you like you were some supporting character in my story, never stopping to realize that you've been leading your own all along." She gave a short, quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You always did think you were the main character," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah. Well, turns out this whole time, I was just the comedic relief," I admitted. Meanwhile, you were the one actually shaping the future of entire companies, making moves that people like me didn't even see coming. Emma smirked, but there was warmth in her expression now, something softer, something that told me she was starting to believe that I wasn't just saying the right words, I was actually feeling them. You know, she said, tilting her head slightly, I never needed you to validate what I do. I never needed your approval, or anyone else's, for that matter. But I won't lie, it would have been nice to have my own brother see me for who I really am. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest. I see you now, I said, my voice quieter, more certain than it had been before. And I'm sorry it took me so damn long. She nodded slowly, as if letting that sink in, as if deciding whether to fully believe me. You've always been good at talking, she said, tapping her fingers lightly against the railing. Now let's see if you're any good at showing up. I raised an eyebrow. Showing up? Emma shrugged. Words are easy, she said simply. You say you want to know me, that you want to understand what I do, but understanding takes effort. It means actually caring about the work I do, actually being interested in the things I spend my time on. It means remembering that our conversations don't always have to be about you. That last part stung, but I knew she wasn't saying it to be cruel. She was saying it because it was true. I had spent years dominating conversations, assuming that whatever I had to say was always the most interesting, the most important. Emma had never fought me for space, had never demanded attention, had never pushed back when I made her the punchline of my jokes. But that didn't mean she had been okay with it. And if I was serious about changing, about actually becoming the kind of brother she deserved, then I had to prove it with more than just words. All right, I said after a moment, nodding. Then tell me about your work. Tell me about this deal you just closed, about how you managed to turn your company's finances around. Walk me through it, like I'm one of the executives you've been dealing with all night. Emma blinked as if she hadn't expected that response. Then she tilted her head, considering. You really want to know, she asked, skeptical but intrigued. I met her gaze without hesitation. Yeah, I said. I do. She studied me for another moment, then let out a breath, shaking her head with a small smile. All right, she said, pushing off the railing. But don't say I didn't warn you. It's not exactly the most thrilling story for someone who's used to being the center of attention. I smirked, motioning for her to continue. I think I can handle it, I said. Besides, it's about time I started paying attention to the things that actually matter. Emma gave me a look that was somewhere between disbelief and appreciation, then finally started talking. And as I listened, really listened, to her walk me through the intricacies of financial restructuring, through the decisions she had made, through the careful calculations and strategic moves that had led to the deal of a lifetime, I realized something surprising. I wasn't bored. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely fascinated by something Emma had to say, not because I was waiting for my turn to speak, not because I was trying to find a way to make myself look better, but because I was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something better between us.